Tonight, out-of-control wildfires and a persistent wind keep tens of millions under a smoky threat.
That pain in your lungs, the irritation in your eyes, and it just feels very apocalyptic.
The new promise for Canada from the White House. Changes to school gender policies throw New Brunswick's government into turmoil.
It potentially could force an election.
Even as they cope with a catastrophic dam collapse, civilians in Ukraine come under fire.
Promote the river and the Russian
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
We will get to that story of all that smoke and haze in Canada and the U.S. in just a moment, but we are starting tonight with breaking news from south of the border. Donald Trump says he is being indicted again, and tonight an already unprecedented 2024 presidential run-up is suddenly even more uncertain. So let's go to Katie Simpson, who's in Washington. Katie, what do we know right now?
Adrian, welcome back to uncharted territory. For the first time in U.S. history, a former president is facing a federal indictment. It is significant, it is serious, and once again, it's expected to bring chaos. Donald Trump says his lawyers have been informed that he's being indicted for his handling of classified documents after leaving office. There are multiple reports he'll face 7 counts, details to officially be confirmed when he appears in court on Tuesday afternoon in Miami. The investigation has spanned months, led by special counsel Jack Smith, looking into the documents Trump took when he left the White House and allegations he resisted demands to return them. Trump released a video declaring himself innocent, saying this is a politically motivated investigation.
We can't let this continue to go on because it's ripping our country to shreds. We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them. It's a hoax.
This is Trump's second indictment. He's facing felony charges in New York State, and this is not likely the last indictment for Trump. There's the federal investigation into January 6th and the investigation in Georgia into efforts to overturn the vote.
And then, of course, there's the race for the presidency. What does this mean for that Republican race in particular?
Well, conventional thinking would be that charges hurt a candidate, but this is Donald Trump. Every time he's faced serious legal jeopardy, it's politically energized him. After both the initial search of his home at Mar-a-Lago for documents and when he was arrested separately in New York, we saw the Republican base rally behind him, the core supporters who love Trump. And then the party establishment supports him too, making him even stronger. Adrian.
All right, Katie Simpson in Washington, thank you. So now let's go to the story of Canada's wildfires and the poor air quality they are driving for tens of millions of people. Huge parts of Canada and the U.S. just not used to this much smoke, canceling sporting events and outdoor activities, even delaying flights. From parts of northern Canada to North Carolina, including megacities like Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and Toronto, the toxic haze could swirl for days. Thomas Daigle followed the reaction in Toronto as the smoke had people on edge and masked up.
Canada's biggest city cast in a dark shadow. The smell of smoke filled Toronto's air, leading to the return of pandemic face masks.
I also bought eye drops because I got a really bad headache the other day while being outside.
The harmful haze drifting from wildfires, packing an almost invisible punch at street level. Though the danger couldn't always be seen, Environment Canada at one point said the air posed a high risk to health.
Poor air quality, it sucks still.
Schools kept kids inside for recess, and this little one volunteered to go help fight the flames.
This is the particles that are in it that could be dangerous for the little lungs, so I think an indoor recess isn't going to hurt them.
Some went out to buy an air purifier, leaving certain stores running low on stock. The Toronto Zoo closed early.
In some situations, we have made the decision to keep the animals indoors.
The Canadian Open saw golfers tee off with the haze in the distance, while the Blue Jays kept their stadium roof closed for the second straight night.
Again, a closed roof here at Rogers Centre tonight.
The Toronto Soccer Association canceled all of its games.
My biggest concern is that we're hoping this is not the way it's going to be all summer.
The amount that's coming from the wildfires at the moment is just completely overwhelming.
Professor Greg Evans monitors the air quality in his backyard and isn't going outside without a mask, based on the pollution he's seeing.
About 4 times higher than normal, which is a lot, but it's nowhere near as severe as what Ottawa and Kingston have been experiencing.
The national capital got to breathe a little easier with Ottawa's air quality finally improving after smoke blanketed the region for days. All the better now for this track meet.
Looks like it's cleared up a lot. It's kind of like a miracle.
So, Thomas, when it comes to protecting people, predicting the poor air quality seems to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, ultimately, it could have been much worse today. The local public school board told parents that it is incredibly difficult to predict the air quality, and going forward, it's going to be up to individual school principals to decide whether kids get to go outside or have to stay inside for recess based on the air quality health index, which can change fast and has been changing. The local soccer association is saying they still haven't made up their minds about canceling games for this weekend because of all this poor air that is still lingering here, and the expectation is we could see more cancellations due to bad air in the months ahead. Adrian.
All right, Thomas Daigle in Toronto tonight. Thanks, Thomas. Well, the U.S. president is pledging more support for the fight against wildfires here in Canada. The murk of wildfire smoke choking Washington, D.C. is proving once again environmental disasters like this know no borders. For the details, we turn again tonight to Katie Simpson.
It's faint right there in the middle of your screen. The Capitol building obscured by wildfire smoke. The hazy blanket stretching south to D.C., engulfing much of the U.S. East Coast along the way. Roughly 129 million people are living under alerts, warning of dangerous conditions.
Washington, D.C. has some of the worst air quality in the country. It's under a code purple, which means it's very unhealthy, and there are some visibility problems.
The smoke triggered hundreds of flight delays and even a temporary ground stop in Philadelphia. Those still able to fly relieved to escape the brutal conditions.
You can feel a little bit of that pain in your lungs, the irritation in your eyes, and it just feels very apocalyptic in some ways.
Believe it or not, this is actually an improvement in New York, a day after smoke gave the city a terrifying orange glow. The tabloids say blame Canada, but locals aren't ready to point a finger north.
It's just stressing. No, I don't blame Canada. I feel like, the whole world is not dealing with the environmental situation.
U.S. President Joe Biden is authorizing additional American resources to help fight the wildfires.
We already have 600 American firefighters on the ground and been there for a while in Canada.
Details were discussed on a call with Prime Minister Trudeau Wednesday. A source tells CBC News Canada initiated the call, with Trudeau telling Biden the situation is raging out of control.
This is the worst air quality we've had at least since the 1960s when we started monitoring.
Air quality in the U.S. is expected to largely clear up by Saturday, but public health authorities say smoky conditions could return as these wildfires rage on. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
So joining us now, CBC News meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff. So I suppose million-dollar question for millions of people right now. What is it going to take to clear this smoke?
Yeah, Adrian, it is going to take a fairly big system to sweep out this kind of low-level smoke that we have hanging in the atmosphere. I want to show you the big picture, the weather pattern that's been stuck in place basically for 5 days now. That spinning low over the Maritimes, finally moving out towards the coast. That's what's locked in those north to south winds for days. And over the weekend, we're going to see those winds sort of become stagnant. That's not enough, even with those showers, to sweep out the smoke. Adrian, it's really going to take a big pressure system that we will get on Monday with a full reversal of those winds. Hopefully, that's when we get the cleaner air.
So you've clearly seen that, this smoke has drawn so much international attention, particularly to those wildfires in Quebec. But we're just sort of a month into the Canadian fire season. Even when this is over, obviously, I guess it's not over.
You're right. This is just the start of what really could be a continued bad season from coast to coast to coast. We've got a couple of factors lining up. This is officially an El Nino season, which means hot and dry on the west coast normally. We have unusually dry soil across so much of the country that we really saw in May, record-breaking dry soil. And finally, we're really just getting into the lightning that we see in the summertime that is that big trigger for the second half of the season. So not over yet.
Very cheerful. Johanna Wagstaff in Vancouver. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hundreds of firefighters from France and New Brunswick have arrived in Quebec to help battle the wildfires.
We're hoping to tell Quebecers that they will be able to going back home, but in the short term, it won't be possible.
More than 13,000 people across the province have been ordered to leave their homes. Cooler weather has helped, but air quality remains poor. There are more than 50 active fires. So far, almost 700,000 hectares have been burnt. And that's the West Kiskatinaw River fire that's now raging about 10 kilometers east of Tumbler Ridge in British Columbia. About 2,400 residents have been ordered to leave immediately. Officials say the fire is being driven by those strong winds. And in Alberta, the wildfires have destroyed over 1.2 million hectares. More than 70 fires are still active, about 20 out of control. And Nova Scotia's largest wildfire is now contained, but travel restrictions are still in effect. 4 other fires are also under control. Well, in New Brunswick, the premier is facing backlash after his government's change to an LGBTQ school policy that had been in place for 3 years. Cale Hounsell shows us how some of the criticism is coming from inside his cabinet.
After weeks of controversy, the results are in. A review of a New Brunswick policy intended to protect LGBTQ students, some say, may now do the opposite.
I came out at school first just because it was a more comfortable space.
Alex Harris says he's worried his friends won't have the same protection if they're forced to tell their parents they want to change their names or pronouns.
I know one of my friends would most likely get kicked out of their house, and another one could be at risk of physical abuse. Like, that's the reality of the situation, and that's what this policy was originally trying to prevent.
Known as Policy 713, it was brought in 2020 to set requirements for schools to provide an inclusive environment. It was mandatory for teachers to respect the chosen names and pronouns of children. Now the government says if the child is under 16, staff will need a parent's permission to officially change the child's name.
I would expect that this will end up before the Human Rights Commission.
New Brunswick's education minister is adamant this is not about outing kids, and that if they don't want to tell their parents, students will be referred to a mental health professional.
Parents are our key partners and stakeholders in education, and we need to respect parent rights, and parents do have rights.
But then a rebellion in his own ranks. A political staffer slipped this note to reporters. 8 progressive conservative MLAs, including 6 cabinet ministers, expressing their extreme disappointment in a lack of process and transparency.
We potentially could force an election.
But the premier stood his ground.
I believe that strongly in the case of finding a solution here where we do not exclude parents in their child's life.
It's beyond nonsense. It's harmful. There are lives at risk.
Harris worries the changes will lead to an erosion of rights.
I saw things happening in other places to trans people, and I went, well, I'm safe, but now I'm scared that I'm not safe anymore.
New Brunswick.
The changes take effect July 1st. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
There is renewed pressure tonight to reduce Canada's suicide rate.
We need to pursue means of suicide prevention that are known to actually work.
A new Senate report says the rate has barely moved 7 years into a federal strategy designed to bring it down. It recommends support for the highest risk groups. The rate among Inuit, for example, is as much as 25 times higher than for the general population. But now there's a new concern around suicide prevention. Research that shows Canadian girls dying by suicide at a rate never seen. Bethany Lindsay shows us possible reasons why and what's being done to try to save young lives.
At 21, Hattie Jang shares lessons she learned the hard way on how to survive as a girl becoming a teen.
When you don't feel like you know what's going on, you don't have control over a lot of these stressors in your life, you feel very helpless.
Ages 10 to 14 were rough for her. As a crisis center volunteer, she offers advice for kids on getting through it.
We want to kind of start them off young to make sure no kid, no teen has to go through what I had to go through.
A new study shows an unprecedented trend, a sharp increase in the rate of suicide deaths for girls aged 10 to 14, hitting about twice the rate for boys by 2018.
It's highly atypical for females to die by suicide more than males in any other age group.
She's seeing younger girls in crisis in her practice too. It's not clear why, but those adolescent years can be a roller coaster, and girls now hit puberty earlier.
There's all these social environmental pressures that are going on, but the actual brain hasn't adapted or hasn't developed to keep pace.
Then there's social media.
You see what is happening around you right there at your fingertips, how your friends, how your peers are living their life, and you reference it to your own, and you can't escape it.
There are signs the rise in suicide deaths may have subsided.
It was quite sharply up in 2018, but then it came down quite a bit in 2019 and 2020.
But researchers don't know what's happened since then. Hattie Jang's turning point came when a friend saw she was in crisis and offered to walk her to the school counselor's office.
I think that's a single thing that changed my mental health journey and perhaps even saved my life.
She tells struggling teens the same is possible for them.
One day you're going to feel like kind of waking up from a nightmare of the past I used to be, and you're going to look at almost like taking off sunglasses.
Bethany Lindsay, CBC News, Vancouver.
And please, if you're in need of support, help is available 24 hours a day by calling Talk Suicide Canada. That number is 1-833-456-4566, or you can text 45645. In France, there's been a shocking daylight attack at a playground. A man stabbed 4 toddlers and 2 adults. 2 of those toddlers are now in critical condition, fighting for their lives. Police say the detained suspect is a 31-year-old Syrian with refugee status in Sweden. A prosecutor says his motivations, while unclear, are not terrorism-related. The humanitarian crisis in southern Ukraine is worsening tonight after massive flooding from that collapsed dam. Thousands are still trapped. As Chris Brown shows us, in some cases, rescue operations are coming under fire.
As if having their homes flooded and their lives washed away wasn't grotesque enough, as these Ukrainians were being rescued, Russian artillery opened fire on them. Ukraine's chief rabbi on a humanitarian mission to flooded Kherson was one of those forced to dive for cover.
Promote the river and the Russian
Ukraine claims 9 people were injured, but it may have been this man the guns were aiming for. President Volodymyr Zelensky visited rescuers and met with patients in a hospital. We will rebuild everything, he said. The enormity of the breaching of the dam, which was controlled by Russia, and Ukraine claims destroyed by Russia too, is still emerging, although the many thousands stuck on the South Russian-controlled side of the river appear to be the worst off.
People are really stranded in areas completely flooded without any means to leave.
One hazard are countless unearthed mines that could now wash up anywhere, along with oil, gas, and other pollutants, says this former Ukrainian environment minister.
We have evidence that some cemeteries were destroyed, and unfortunately, that is a great pollution as well.
A pollution from bodies.
Yes, I don't want to say it very loudly.
But even as the enormous rescue effort continued, so did the combat, and Ukraine's counteroffensive may be intensifying. And Russia's defense minister suggested battles are raging. The enemy attempted to attack, he claimed, but we destroyed 30 tanks in 2 hours. Bluster without a shred of proof. Whatever battles may be unfolding, Ukraine's government is staying silent about them, likely for strategic reasons, but also to keep the focus on the expanding humanitarian catastrophe. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Televangelist Pat Robertson is being remembered tonight for his profound influence on U.S. politics.
Lord God, fill me now with your Spirit.
Starting in 1959, he transformed a bankrupt Virginia TV station into the world's first Christian TV network driven by tax-free donations. By the 80s, he was turning his broadcast reach into political clout for the Republicans.
He's not ashamed to take on the liberal media in defense of conservative values.
In 1988, he took a run at the party's presidential nomination and pioneered the now common strategy of courting Iowa's network of evangelical Christian churches.
Thank you.
Robertson was known to blame natural disasters on gay people and feminists. Critics say he fueled intolerance. His Christian broadcasting network announced his death at the age of 93. With hotter, drier summers becoming the norm, there's growing concern about shortages of fresh water on BC's Sunshine Coast.
Well, it's very concerning. I mean, we're proactive, we're trying to plan for it.
Why some say the province needs a long-term solution. Next. David Johnston is facing increasing political pressure, but will it make any difference?
My suggestion, Madam Chair, is that one looks at a record of service and comes to one conclusion about conflict of interest.
Rosie will be here with that issue. Plus, amidst all the smoke and haze, a little humor.
We were just trying to make light of what seemed pretty much like a dire situation.
Our neighbors to the south having some fun at Canada's expense. We're back at 2. Those are people in Rio de Janeiro marking World Ocean Day, calling this a symbolic group hug with the sea, if you will. The day is intended to celebrate and raise awareness about protecting oceans. Elsewhere in the world saw cleanups of some polluted shorelines. Well, water is also a concern for a coastal community in BC, bracing for a third straight summer of drought, making preparations to conserve water, but knowing it might not be enough. As Renee Filipponi tells us, the people on the Sunshine Coast are frustrated with their new reality.
The Sloan brothers started their business just last year.
1, 2, 3.
Installing rainwater tanks on the Sunshine Coast, and business is booming.
Started out installing rainwater tanks for our family and friends. We kept getting mobbed by their neighbors, asking us to install tanks for them.
This is going to be so
This customer hired them because she wants enough water this year to keep her plants and fruit trees alive.
This tank is arguably a little bit overkill, but her attitude was, I've got the space, right? And you're never gonna be upset because you have too much water.
For years, this coastal community north of Vancouver and reachable only by boat has seen droughts and severe water restrictions. It's only June, and residents are worried about how bad it could get this year.
It's very concerning. I mean, we're proactive, we're trying to plan for it.
There is a push to conserve, but the community is pointing fingers in many directions. At increased development, government red tape on new water projects, the impact of forestry on the watershed, and climate change.
We're just waiting to turn on the valve.
This is one of the well pumps the district is hoping to get online soon. It will help, but may not be enough to stop another water crisis this year.
And our summers are hotter, they're drier, and the dry period is lasting longer. And in fact, we fully expect it to happen again in 2023.
Because we can't water them, or we haven't.
Brian Smith runs this farm and brewery. Last year, water use restrictions forced him to truck in water from the Fraser Valley. He says the ongoing crisis is having an impact on people's mental health.
Stress in terms of customers saying, hey, are you guys, going to get cut off? Stress from employees who wondered if they were going to lose their jobs because we might be cut off.
He says with no long-term solution in sight, there's a feeling of doom for many on the Sunshine Coast. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Gibsons, BC.
After the break, Rosie's here with that issue. You hanging in, Rosie?
Just a little squeaky tonight, Adrienne, but we are still going to talk about Pierre Poilievre's long and late night attack on the budget.
I'm calling on him to do the honorable thing, to put aside his pride and his personal ego and cancel this budget.
The budget passed this afternoon, but what's to be made of Poilievre's pivot back to the issue of the economy? Chantal, Andrew, and Althea join me to talk about that and more. Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week.
I am rising today to speak, and to speak, and to speak for the people who have no voice. The people who have been silenced for too long.
The speaking ended before midnight because the opposition leader ran out of time, but the point was made. Inflation and another interest rate hike has made it difficult for Canadians, and the government needs to do more to help.
Yesterday I spoke for 4 hours to stop the inflationary tax hiking Trudeau budget. Now, I did this not just because I disagree with the irresponsible overspending that has caused the inflation. I've long believed that, but because I believe we're headed to a very serious crisis.
Pierre Poilievre said the Prime Minister should cancel his summer holidays and come up with a budget that works. Now, worth noting, the budget implementation bill passed this afternoon. But what's to be made of the Conservative strategy? How concerned should Canadians be? Let's bring everybody in. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see you all. Excuse my voice to you guys and everybody listening. Chantal, I'll start with you. Was this sort of theatrical? Was there a real and important point that Pierre Poilievre was trying to make? Did he make it? What's your take?
One and the other important point, certainly. Theater, too much of it for what it actually was. I mean, to listen to the Conservative leader early on in the week and then again to his caucus yesterday, it sounded like he was going to physically be on his feet until the government caved and came up with a deficit-free budget, which was never going to happen, and obviously didn't happen. Rarely is so much theater surrounded a 4-hour performance. But that being said, the point is important. I think the strategy is to pivot away from the China file and to go back to bread and butter issues that are closer to the hearts of voters. What's missing here are answers. I mean, getting rid of the carbon tax isn't going to resolve any of the big picture issues. So I'm guessing Mr. Poilievre will soon tell us how he would deal with the National Child Care Program, the health transfer to the provinces, which he has approved, the green economy incentives, the fate of dental care. These are all policies about which there is not a really known Conservative position.
I wouldn't hold your breath for that answer anytime soon, but I take your point. Andrew, the point that he's trying to make, I guess, as Chantal says, is that we also need to be, or maybe instead of talking about foreign interference, which I'm not sure is registering the same way for Canadians as, for instance, another interest rate hike this week.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm more than keen on having discussions about fiscal policy, but this was very strange. I mean, filibusters, as it was originally announced to be, are generally reserved either for some kind of abuse of power where the government's running roughshod over Parliament's prerogatives, or for some policy that the opposition thinks will cause irrevocable harm and for which the government doesn't have a mandate. But if we're talking about the carbon tax or deficit spending, I mean, say what you will about either of those policies, they've been pretty thoroughly litigated through 3 elections. Yeah. So what suddenly required them to go into filibuster mode, particularly when it just fizzled out into basically a long speech and not much more than that. On the substance of it, look, I didn't like that budget at all either, but I don't see it as bringing on some immediate precipitous crisis that requires this kind of exaggerated rhetoric. It just looked like he was flailing around, frankly.
Well, even to say, as they did today, Althea, that Conservatives are not going to stop working all summer, and to contrast it with the idea that the Prime Minister's taking off on some holiday somewhere, which I assume he'll have a break like everybody else, but.
I don't know what Justin Trudeau's summer plans are. I don't think they have been announced. Kind of to just drill the point home, though, this wasn't actually a filibuster. Like the filibusters that you see on TV from the floor of Congress, for example, are members who speak sometimes for days on end.
Yeah.
Pierre Poilievre announced that he was going to filibuster after the government had already passed a motion in the House limiting the time of debate to 5 hours.
Yeah.
So he couldn't have spoken for more than 5 hours without the unanimous consent of the chamber. So it's like faux outrage on top of faux outrage. The speech, I actually thought it wasn't so bad. I kind of veered off the rails around 11 o'clock because he kind of ran out of things to say and started repeating himself. But it had nothing to do with the budget. In fact, even the 904 amendments that the Conservatives brought forward had nothing to do with the budget. They were not substantive amendments. They were trying to delete each clause of the budget. I mean, it's just not serious. His speech did not talk about the budget. Instead, Pierre Poilievre started off telling us about how Henry VIII added copper to the sterling pound so he could have more money. And then he told us he was very concerned about the impending debt crisis that he sees on the horizon. And then he started talking about basically his own plans, what he would do on immigration, what he would do on housing. He told us he believes climate change is real. So there was some news around 10 o'clock at night. But it had nothing to do with the Budget Implementation Act. It had everything to do with Pierre Poilievre using the floor to introduce himself again to anybody who's paying attention.
Which, by the way, he's pretty good at.
Sure.
You know, when he puts down the attack dog mode, he's pretty good at explaining his economic philosophy. You can put it in layman's terms. He's quite fluent. I'd like to see more of this character.
Well, he's good at doing a speech, that's for sure, even if it goes 4.5 hours and not everybody's listening. Chantal.
Not everybody is listening. I suspect the press conference today was to try to say, I spoke last night and here's what I was trying to say. It was also meant to reconnect the Conservative Party with the issue that's been uppermost on the minds of Canadians this week. And yes, the hike in interest rate was of interest, but forest fires and what's been happening, literally the feeling that Canada is burning with its impact on the U.S. was very much on everyone's mind. And until this news conference this morning, the Conservatives were not very much into that picture. In question period or in that speech last night, it was as if it was taking place on another planet. But to the points that my colleagues have made, yes, it is possible for Pierre Poilievre to deliver substantial speeches, but he seems to be wedded to gimmicks that get in the way of the speeches and the policy statements that he is trying to articulate. And I don't know why they think this is a smart way to go about it.
Althea?
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I think it is, you know, he's still trying to introduce himself. The polls in Quebec show as Chantal pointed out last week, he's not doing so great. And some polls in Ontario suggest he's not doing so great either. So he's trying to use all the opportunities that are in front of him. I actually think that the interest rate was a good one for him because he has been warning about this for a long time. That was not a good announcement for the government. So, you know, he was piggybacking on those events. And I do think the problem with Pierre Poilievre when he starts talking is that there is good substance, frankly, a lot more substance than a lot of other parliamentarians, but there is also this tendency to exaggerate. And then when you start talking about Justin Trudeau being a socialist authoritarian leader, I mean, this stuff doesn't ring true at all. So it discredits the rest of the substance that is in his speech that's actually good.
Andrew?
Yeah, for a guy who made a point of announcing he was running for prime minister when he was running for leader of the Conservative Party, at some point somebody has to take him aside and say, it's time to start looking like a prime minister. And we have not seen a great deal of that.
Although if the goal was to get people talking about him and the Conservatives on the economy, I mean, here we are talking about it. Maybe that was the only goal, to try and take back some of that narrative, Chantal.
Maybe so, but it would be possible to have that conversation and say, here is an aspiring prime minister delivering a serious speech. You would have to take away all the bluster and frankly, the over-the-top assertions that surrounded it, including the fact that he is demanding that the budget be scrapped and that it be rewritten with the Conservatives. Who needs that?
Yeah.
I mean, how credible does that make him look?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Okay, we're going to take a short break there. Thank you all. We'll be back with another round of At Issue.
The issue of foreign interference deserves serious and robust debate. I will continue to invite disagreement on my recommendations, but will not be deterred from completing my work.
David Johnston spent over 3 hours testifying before a House committee this week. Did he defend himself well enough to move forward? That's next on The National. Welcome to another round of At Issue. Earlier this week, David Johnston appeared before a parliamentary committee on foreign interference.
My suggestion, Madam Chair, is that one looks at a record of service and comes to one's conclusion about conflict of interest. And I would again plea that you focus the attention on foreign interference, this report, which will be reviewed, and others where we must do a much better job.
Johnston spent more than 3 hours testifying before the committee of MPs, but most of the questions were about whether Johnston is the man for the job and why he decided not to call for a public inquiry into foreign interference.
The issue of foreign interference deserves serious and robust debate. I will continue to invite disagreement on my recommendations, but will not be deterred from completing my work.
So what's to be made of Johnston's testimony this week? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Althea, why don't you start us off? I don't think David Johnston was going to change minds at that committee, but do you think he advanced his cause at all and that he can now go about doing his work?
No, in fact, I think he hurt his cause. And I want to say, like, it started off where you, like, personally feel bad for David Johnston, like, watching this. Like, it felt very aggressive, and you had, especially Conservative members, kind of badgering a senior citizen. But when he started opening his mouth, yeah, 3 points. He does not seem to recognize that when all the opposition parties vote non-confidence in him and ask him to step aside, it means something. And that is so bizarre to me from someone who was the Governor General, wrote a book about trust, and understands that trust is like what is at the root of this whole issue about trust in our election, that he can't recognize that that is meaningful. The two other points really have to do with the rigor in his own report. He poked holes at his own report. He said that there was information when he wrote his report that later that has come out since that wasn't available to him, which is strange because in his report he actually writes that he has seen all the relevant information. I mean, I think that was a doubtful comment when we read it a month ago, but surely it doesn't stand anymore. And then when he started talking about how he hasn't interviewed Han Dong, even though he cleared him of any wrongdoing, how he didn't answer this question, but because his lack of answer suggests that he didn't ask any further questions, that he might have been given information and basically took the public servants or the political staff or the minister's words at it. So no, I mean, he raised more doubts about the credibility of his first report, and he did not address the criticisms about him. In fact, I think he made them worse.
Chantal.
So this clip you played, that I'll continue to invite disagreement, I guess the end of the sentence should have been if only to dismiss it or ignore it, because that's basically the impression that he gave over the course of his testimony, for one. Two, what Mr. Johnston's job at the committee was not to convince necessarily the MPs around the table, but the larger audience, that he had done more than give the government a pass on this. And he did the opposite.
I mean, it feels, Andrew, like he's getting some bad advice, too, about how dug in to be about this role and the work.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, I think the most damaging part of this was, and it was widely panned, was that it shifted attention from the already established question of his conflicts and whether or not he gets that, and clearly he doesn't, but onto the demerits of the report itself. And yes, he couldn't answer a number of the questions that were put to him, particularly on the question of this discrepancy between what Aaron O'Toole was briefed on at very high levels. I think it was the director of CSIS himself who briefed him that this was an orchestrated operation by the Chinese state to defame both him and his party, versus what was in Mr. Johnston's report, which was, oh, we can't trace it back to a state actor, and you know, it might have just been organic, and you know, it was party agnostic. Well, that report only came out a few days before Mr. O'Toole was briefed. So what happened in the interim? Did all this new information just come out then? That's hard to believe. It just sounds like he didn't do his homework. And then the whole business with Han Dong, where somebody should have rang alarm bells that you know, I don't think it's disputed that the Chinese government intervened in his nomination, that he was close with the Chinese consular officials, and nobody said, well, you know, we don't want to convict anybody of anything, but let's look into this. Not the Prime Minister at the time, according to Mr. Johnston, and not Mr. Johnston's report, who incredibly didn't talk to Han Dong, didn't talk to the Chief Electoral Officer, didn't talk to Aaron O'Toole until basically the report was done. So yes, I think what a lot of people would conclude from this was a 2-month whip round by David Johnston, who doesn't have a real background in intelligence, where nobody's under oath, there's no cross-examination, et cetera, is not a sufficient process.
So what happens next then, Althea? Like, where does this go if he's not going to leave and the government's not going to fire him? Like, what happens?
He does not want to leave. He has announced to us this week that he plans to start holding public hearings as early as next month.
Yeah.
And so the government has to decide whether or not they want to have Mr. Johnston engage in this process. I don't think the Conservative Party actually wants to play ball, but let's say that they are an engaged partner. Who would take on this job, whether it is a judicial inquiry or it is this renewed public process? If you get rid of David Johnston, who's going to say yes? Who has the credibility and the approval of all the parties to take this on? That, in my mind, is a pretty monumental task, especially having seen what has gone through with David Johnston and how he's been attacked.
Well, but let's remember how that came to be, though. Let's remember how that came to be. The onus was on the Prime Minister, in my opinion, to reach out to the opposition leaders. He should have started by saying, we're going to choose, they should have gone to a public inquiry, we're going to choose whoever it is together. Now, if Pierre Poilievre or whoever else wanted to play silly nonsense around that, they would look the bad one. But the onus was on the Prime Minister to initiate the process. Instead, what he did was he chose somebody unilaterally, basically over the objections of the opposition.
Was there that climate, though, for that? I don't know at the time when it happened. But anyway, Chantal, go ahead.
It's too late to say whatever David Johnston wants to do, somebody else will do who doesn't stand or has not been rebuked by Parliament. At this point, the government has to be looking at holding a public inquiry, and yes, I do believe that there are people who are competent to run such an inquiry that could be agreeable to all parties in the House of Commons. But the government, I think, will be inclined to let this slide, thinking it's summer. This has not really had that much traction with the public, so let's just let sleeping dog lies and see where we're at in the fall.
Okay. That was a good conversation. Thank you all. We'll leave it there. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content, including the panel's take on the Prime Minister's response to the wildfires. Listen to that conversation on any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/The National. Now back to Adrienne in Toronto.
Thanks, Rosie. Feel better. Coming up, all that wildfire smoke has some Americans seeing red.
Well, you believe these guys in Canada? I'm suing Canada. I want my money on the 1st and the 15th.
Of course you do. Social media explodes as New Yorkers poke fun at Canada in our moment. Well, that was the scene in New York City yesterday as smoke turned the metropolis into an eerie scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Some of that smoke still lingers, of course. And that has sparked an explosion on social media of New Yorkers poking fun at Canada. A few jokes to go with the smoke is our moment.
Yesterday, when I walked outside, I thought about that song from South Park, Blame Canada, and I just posted that. The other thing I saw on social media was like people just posting memes from like RuPaul's Drag Race where like the sky was orange.
God, look how orange you look, girl.
I've never seen Blade Runner, but I saw that people were comparing it to that. In the movie Dune, someone was like, they just basically blocked Canada's main Twitter account. Which I thought was pretty funny.
You want to send smog our way? Oh, you believe these guys in Canada?
But we knew that Canada had nothing to do with it. Obviously, we were just trying to make light of like a dire situation.
And you can barely see New Jersey. On my social media, I've had a lot of Canadians, saying, we're sorry. It's really sweet.
But there's seriously nothing to apologize for.
Sometimes in situations like this, it's like, let's just have fun with it, because what else are we going to do?
Yeah, so sorry, it is what we do. One New York TikToker said, Canada gave us Wayne Gretzky, so Canada gets an eternal pass on everything. We will take that. Thank you very much. That is a national for June the 8th. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.